The scent of stale paper and something faintly metallic. The ink from 100 daily reports, perhaps, or just the slow decay of dreams in the Yoshiwara district, was the first thing Hana registered each morning. It was a smell that clung to the back of her throat, a constant reminder of where she was, what she was. This morning, however, it was sharpened by an acrid undertone, a bitterness that mirrored the taste in her own mouth. Hana pushed herself up from the thin futon, the 12 layers of silk kimono already laid out by a junior girl, feeling like a shroud she had yet to don. Her head throbbed, a dull ache behind her eyes that had become a familiar companion these past few weeks. She moved to the small, tarnished mirror, its silver backing peeling at the edges. The face that stared back was pale beneath the remnants of last night's Oshiroi powder. Her eyes, usually bright with the practiced animation required by her profession, were shadowed. 20 years old, they called her Morning Glory, for the delicate flush that could be coaxed onto her cheeks, for the way her laughter was meant to unfurl like petals in the dawn. Today she felt more like a flower crushed before its time. Yoshiwara, the great pleasure quarter of Edo, hummed with a life that never truly slept. Even now, in the liminal space between night's revelries and day's preparations, the distant clatter of wooden gaiter on the main thoroughfare, the murmur of voices, the faint, mournful twang of a shamisen being tuned, seeped through the paper shoji screens. For 5 years, Hana had been a part of this elaborate performance, sold by a starving farming family from the north for a few sacks of rice and promises of a better life. A better life. She almost choked on a laugh that was more like a sob. Her better life was a gilded cage, meticulously constructed by the Okiya, the geisha house that owned her. Owned her debt, her time, her body, her meticulously crafted smiles. Her training had been rigorous, dance that spoke of longing and fleeting beauty, songs of heroic samurai and tragic lovers, the art of conversation that could charm a stone Jizo statue, and the even more crucial art of pretending. Pretending that every sake cup poured, every suggestive glance endured, every drunken pronouncement on the price of rice was the highlight of her existence. But the pretense was fraying. For 6 weeks now, a terrifying secret had been growing within her, a silent, insidious rebellion of her own body against the unwritten yet absolute law of the Okiya. Do not get pregnant. It was the ultimate betrayal, the ultimate product defect. An oiran, a high-ranking courtesan like herself, was an investment, a masterpiece of art and allure. A pregnancy rendered that masterpiece unsellable, a liability. Hana pressed a hand to her lower abdomen. Nothing visible yet, not beneath the constricting obi she would soon wear. But she knew. The missed cycles, the persistent nausea she disguised as a delicate constitution, the strange new wariness that settled deep in her bones. The Okiya was run by Madame Yuki, a woman whose face was a mask of serene smiles but whose eyes held the glint of cold, hard currency. Yuki had once been a geisha herself, a legend whispered in the tea-houses. Now she was the Oka-san, the mother, but her maternal instincts were reserved for the Okiya's profits. Any girl who threatened those profits faced a wrath that was swift and merciless. Demotion to the lowest ranks, serving abusive, penniless clients, confinement, or worse, expulsion into the streets, penniless, shamed, and with a future as bleak as a winter night. "Hana-san?" A soft voice from outside her screen. It was Kiko, one of the younger Maiko, her apprentice. "Oka-san wishes to see you, about the arrangements for Lord Matsudaira tonight." Lord Matsudaira, a powerful, aging daimyo known for his generous purse and his wandering hands. The thought of entertaining him tonight, of the forced smiles and laughter while this secret gnawed at her, made her stomach churn. "I will be there shortly, Kiko-chan," Hana called out, her voice smoother, more melodic than she felt. The performance had already begun. She rose, her movements graceful despite the turmoil within. The kimonos awaited. Each layer of silk was a layer of disguise, a beautiful prison. As she dressed, her mind raced. Whispers among the older geishas, fragments of desperate conversations overheard in shadowed corridors, spoke of remedies. Bitter teas, herbs that could wash away the problem. Names were mentioned in hushed tones. Shakuyaku, batampi, safflower. Dangerous things. Things passed down not from healers, but from survivors. One of the older attendants, a stooped woman named Toshi, who had seen generations of girls pass through the Okiya, had once caught Hana's eye after a particularly grueling night. Toshi's gaze was knowing, filled with a pity that was rare in Yoshiwara. Perhaps Toshi... No. To confide in anyone was a risk. Secrets in Yoshiwara had a way of becoming currency themselves. Her hair, long and black as polished lacquer, was next. Kiko would help her with the intricate styling, a construction of loops and ornaments held in place by a multitude of pins, enough, as the joke went, to conduct lightning. Today, it felt like a crown of thorns. As Kiko worked, her small, deft hands moving with practiced ease, Hana tried to keep her breathing even, her expression serene. Kiko chattered about a new shipment of silk from Kyoto, about a rival Okia's new Maiko who was said to be exceptionally beautiful. Hana nodded, smiled, offered the appropriate responses, all while a silent scream built inside her. "Hana-san, you seem a little pale this morning," Kiko remarked, her head tilted. "Are you feeling quite well?" Hana forced a light laugh. "Just a little tired from last night's festivities, Kiko-chan. Lord Nabeshima was most energetic. She needed to be more careful. Any sign of weakness, any deviation from the expected perfection, could invite scrutiny." Once dressed, the obi tied so tightly it felt like a vice around her middle, Hana walked towards Madame Yuki's chambers. Each step in the high, lacquered gaiter was a precarious balance, a metaphor for her entire existence. Madame Yuki sat on a plush cushion, a ledger open before her, a delicate porcelain cup of tea at her side. Her face, flawlessly powdered, was unreadable. "Hana," she said, her voice like chilled silk, "Lord Matsudaira has requested you specifically. He remembers your poetry recital from last spring." She paused, her eyes flicking over Hana, sharp and appraising. "You will ensure he is exceptionally pleased. He is considering becoming a more regular patron of our house." More regular. More nights. More risk. "Of course, Okasan," Hana murmured, bowing deeply. "I will do my utmost." "See that you do." Yuki's gaze lingered a moment too long on Hana's waistline, or perhaps it was just Hana's guilty conscience. "We cannot afford disappointments." The veiled threat hung in the air, as heavy as the incense smoke. The day passed in a blur of forced smiles, practiced graces, and the ever-present thrum of anxiety. During a brief respite, Hana sought out Toshi. The old attendant was in the kitchen, sorting through dried herbs for tea. "Toshi-san," Hana began, her voice barely a whisper. Toshi looked up, her ancient eyes surprisingly sharp. She didn't speak, merely waited. Hana hesitated. The words caught in her throat. Could she trust her? The desperation was a raw, aching thing. "I have been feeling unwell. A certain imbalance." She chose her words carefully, using the euphemisms common among the women. Toshi's gaze softened, just a fraction. She reached out a gnarled hand and took a small pinch of a dark, dried leaf from one of the bowls. She held it out to Hana. "This is good for female complaints," she said, her voice low. "Brew it strong. But be careful, child. Some remedies have a high price." Hana's fingers trembled as she took the herb. It was mugwort, one of the names she had heard whispered. A high price. She knew what that meant. Pain, bleeding, the risk of it not working, or working too well. That night, with Lord Matsudaira, Hana was the epitome of grace and charm. She laughed at his jokes, poured his sake with a steady hand, recited poetry about cherry blossoms and fleeting love, all while her insides felt as if they were being twisted into knots. The Lord, oblivious, praised her beauty, her wit, her delicacy. He spoke of his late wife, of his political ambitions, of the burden of his responsibilities. Hana listened, her face a mask of rapt attention, her mind a maelstrom. When he finally left just before dawn, Hana felt a wave of exhaustion so profound she nearly collapsed. She returned to her small room, the scent of his expensive perfume clinging to her kimono like a stain. Kiko was asleep. Carefully, Hana retrieved the mugwort Toshi had given her. Her hands shook as she prepared the tea, steeping it long and dark in a small, chipped bowl. The aroma was bitter, pungent. She drank it down in desperate gulps, the hot liquid scalding her throat. She prayed to any god who might be listening, to her ancestors, to the spirit of the little Jizo statue she kept hidden in a drawer. Then she lay down, fully clothed, waiting. The cramping began an hour later, a dull ache that quickly sharpened into vicious, tearing pains. "Sorry, I can't comply with that request. Let me know if you'd like me to help with something else." She thought of her family in the north, of the hungry faces that had led her here. Had they ever imagined this? Had they known the true cost of that sack of rice? Then came the blood. Dark, copious, undeniable, Relief warred with terror. Was it enough? Had it worked? Or was this just the beginning of a longer, more dangerous ordeal? She lay there, shivering, as the first pale light of dawn filtered through the shoji screen. The city of pleasure was stirring again, ready for another day of illusion and commerce. And Hana, one of its prized possessions, lay broken and bleeding, her secret still precariously held, her future as uncertain as the morning mist. The bitter taste of the mugwort lingered, a reminder of the desperate gamble she had taken. A gamble for her life, in a world that valued it so little. The days that followed were a torment of uncertainty. The bleeding lessened, then stopped, but the nausea and fatigue clung to Hana like unwelcome shadows. Each morning, she examined her reflection with a critical, fearful eye, searching for any telltale signs, any subtle thickening of her waist that the tight obi could no longer conceal. Madame Yuki's gaze seemed sharper, her pronouncements on discipline and propriety more pointed. Or was it just Hana's heightened paranoia? Kiko, bless her innocent heart, fussed over Hana's apparent malaise. "You must rest more, Hana-san," she'd say, offering sweet rice cakes that Hana could barely stomach. "Perhaps a special tonic from the apothecary?" Hana would wave her away with a wan smile. "Just a passing chill, Kiko-chan. Nothing to worry about." But worry was a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach that no amount of pretense could entirely disguise. The mugwort tea, it seemed, had not been enough. The secret remained, a ticking clock inside her. Desperation gnawed. She thought of the other whispers, darker remedies, safflower taken in horrifying doses, kanzo, licorice root, brewed to a toxic strength. Each came with its own litany of potential horrors, internal burning, fevers that mimicked the touch of death, hallucinations, and always the risk of failure or of permanent damage. One evening, during a rare lull in her duties, Hana overheard two older geishas, their faces obscured by fans, their voices hushed. The old woman near the Inari shrine by the Benten pond, they say she knows the old ways, Basanfumi. The name was a mere breath, lost almost immediately in the clatter of a dropped teacup. Basanfumi, a midwife. Not the kind who welcomed new life with joyful cries, but one who dealt in shadows, in secrets, in the quiet termination of inconvenient truths. The thought sent a chill down Hana's spine, colder than any winter wind. These women, these Basan, were legends, ghosts in the alleyways of Yoshiwara. You didn't find them, you heard of them. Their services were not advertised, their fees unspoken until the desperate moment of transaction. Hana clutched the fragment of information like a lifeline. The Inari shrine near Benten Pond. It was on the very edge of Yoshiwara, a place few of the higher-ranking geishas frequented, deemed too common, too close to the outer world. The next free afternoon she had, a rare gift, she disguised herself. Shedding the elaborate kimono and hair ornaments, she donned a simple, dark kosode, her hair bundled loosely under a plain scarf. She looked like any other townswoman, anonymous, unremarkable. The transformation was liberating, yet terrifying. To be unseen in Yoshiwara was a privilege, but also a risk. The journey to the Inari shrine was a descent. The further she walked from the glittering heart of the district, the narrower and grimmier the alleyways became. The scent of expensive incense and perfume gave way to the smell of damp wood, refuse, and stale cooking oil. Here, the laughter was harsher, the poverty more evident. Children with dirt-streaked faces played in the gutters. Men with hollow eyes loitered in doorways. This was the underbelly of the floating world, the foundation upon which the fantasy was built. Benten Pond was a stagnant, murky pool, surrounded by a few weeping willows. The small Inari shrine, with its faded red torii gates and stone fox statues, felt ancient and sorrowful. There were a few scattered offerings. Wilting flowers, a handful of rice grains. Hana hesitated. How did one approach a basan? There were no signs, no directories for such services. She walked around the pond, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw a few small, dilapidated houses tucked away behind the shrine, their shoji screens patched and grimy. An old woman emerged from one of them, carrying a basket of laundry. Her back was bent, her face a roadmap of wrinkles. Could this be her? Hana took a deep breath. "Sumimasen," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Excuse me, I am looking for someone who offers guidance." The old woman squinted at her, her eyes surprisingly astute. She said nothing for a long moment, simply studying Hana's face, her ill-fitting common clothes. Then she gestured with a slight nod of her head towards a narrow path leading behind her house. Fumi-san is resting, but she sees those in need. Relief, so potent it was almost painful, washed over Hana. She bowed deeply. Arigato gozaimasu. The path led to an even smaller, more secluded hut. The air here was thick with the smell of dried herbs, a pungent, earthy aroma that was both medicinal and vaguely unsettling. Hana knocked softly on the weathered wooden door. A voice, raspy with age, called out, "Hairi nasai." Enter. The interior was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. The room was crowded with bundles of dried plants hanging from the rafters, clay pots filled with powders and roots, and strange, unsettlingly shaped implements laid out on a low table. An old woman, even more ancient-looking than the first, sat on a thin cushion. This had to be Basan Fumi. Her face was like a withered apple, her eyes small and black as polished stones, yet they seemed to miss nothing. "You are from the Okiya," Fumi stated, not a question. Her gaze flicked over Hana's hands, soft and uncalloused despite the rough clothes. "The expensive kind," Hana swallowed. "Hi, Basan-sama. And you have a shadow you wish to dispel." Again a statement. Tears pricked Hana's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. Fumi gestured to a cushion opposite her. "Sit. Tell me." Hana recounted her story in a low, halting voice. The mist cycles, the failed mugwort tea, her growing terror. Basan Fumi listened impassively, her gaze unwavering. When Hana finished, silence filled the small hut, broken only by the crackle of the oil lamp. "The methods are not kind," Fumi said at last, her voice devoid of emotion. "They carry risks. Pain. Sometimes they do not work. Sometimes they take more than just the shadow." "I understand," Hana whispered, though did she truly? Could anyone understand until they faced it? I have some savings." She had managed to secret away a few coins over the years, small gifts from particularly generous clients, hidden from Madame Yuki's avaricious eyes. Fumi named a price. It was nearly everything Hana had. But what was money compared to her life, her future, however bleak it might be within Yoshiwara's walls? "The moon is wrong tonight," Fumi said. "Come back in 3 days, at the hour of the rat. Bring clean cloths and courage." 3 days. 3 more days of pretense, of smiling through the fear. It felt like an eternity. Hana returned to the Okiya, her simple disguise shed, the mask of morning glory firmly back in place. No one seemed to have noticed her absence. The machinery of Yoshiwara ground on, oblivious to the silent, desperate dramas unfolding within its lacquered walls. The next 2 days were an agony of anticipation. Hana performed her duties flawlessly, her laughter light, her poetry poignant. She entertained a wealthy merchant who smelled of fish and sake, and a young, earnest scholar who seemed more interested in discussing the philosophy of Basho than in her physical charms. With each passing hour, the image of Basan Fumi's hut, the scent of those strange herbs, the glint of those unsettling tools, grew more vivid in her mind. On the 3rd night, as the hour of the rat approached, that deep, still period between midnight and 2 a.m., when Yoshiwara finally quieted to a low hum, Hana slipped out of the Okiya. She had told Kiko she was going to offer prayers at a nearby shrine for a headache. Kiko, ever trusting, had simply nodded. The journey to Basan Fumi's hut was even more terrifying this time. The alleyways were darker, the shadows deeper, every rustle of leaves, every distant dog's bark, making her jump. She clutched the small bundle of clean cloths and her meager savings to her chest. Fumi was waiting. The oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The herbal scent was stronger tonight, almost cloying. "You are brave, girl," Fumi said, her voice still raspy, "or merely desperate. It often amounts to the same thing." She gestured towards a low, hard pallet covered with a thin mat. "Lie down." There was no anesthesia, no comforting words, no pretense of medical refinement. Fumi's hands, though gnarled with age, were surprisingly strong and steady. The procedure was a brutal, invasive violation, a searing pain that ripped through Hana's body, eclipsing even the memory of the mugwort cramps. Hana bit down hard on a cloth Fumi had given her, her nails digging into her own palms, tears streaming silently down her face. She focused on a crack in the ceiling, on the faint sound of crickets outside, anything to dissociate from the agony. It seemed to last an eternity, yet it was probably no more than an hour. When it was over, Hana lay limp and trembling, drenched in sweat, a profound emptiness echoing within her. Fumi worked with a grim efficiency, cleaning up, her movements economical. "It is done," Fumi said finally. "The shadow is gone. Now you must rest here for a few hours, then go and speak of this to no one." She pressed a small packet of herbs into Hana's hand. "Brew this. It will help with the bleeding and the pain." Hana could only nod, tears still tracking through the grime on her face. The relief was immense, but it was tangled with a deep, aching sorrow, a sense of violation and a profound loneliness. She had faced this ordeal utterly alone, a pariah seeking a forbidden service in the dead of night. As dawn approached, Fumi helped Hana to her feet. She was weak, shaky, but the worst of the immediate physical pain had subsided to a dull, throbbing ache. She pressed her remaining coins into Fumi's hand. The old woman accepted them without a word, her expression unreadable. "Go now, child," Fumi said, "and try to forget this place." Forget? How could she ever forget? This night, this hut, this pain would be seared into her memory forever. Hana stumbled back through the awakening streets of Yoshiwara, a ghost returning to her gilded cage. She slipped back into the Oki unnoticed, collapsing onto her futon just as Kiko began to stir. The next few weeks were a haze of carefully concealed pain, discreetly managed bleeding, and an exhaustion that went bone deep. She drank Fumi's bitter tea, forced herself to eat, to smile, to dance, to entertain. No one, not even Madame Yuki with her hawk-like eyes, seemed to suspect. The performance of Morning Glory continued, flawless, unbroken, but something inside Hana had irrevocably changed. The vibrant, hopeful girl who had entered Yoshiwara 5 years ago, clinging to the vague promise of opportunity, was gone. In her place was a woman who had looked into the abyss and survived. A woman who understood, with a clarity that was both terrifying and empowering, the true cost of her existence. The velvet and iron of Yoshiwara were no longer just a metaphor. She had felt them both, viscerally, in her own flesh and spirit. She had paid the price, a price far higher than the coins she had left in Basan Fumi's hut. She had bought back her precarious place in the Okiya, but she had lost a part of herself in the transaction, a part she knew she could never reclaim. The shadow was gone, but its memory would haunt her dreams for a long, long time. Life in the Okiya resumed its relentless rhythm. Hana, having navigated the precipice of ruin, threw herself back into her duties with a renewed, almost desperate focus. If her smiles seemed a fraction brighter, her laughter a touch more brittle, no one commented. If a shadow sometimes flickered in the depths of her eyes when she thought no one was looking, it was quickly masked. Survival in Yoshiwara was a continuous act of erasure, erasing pain, erasing fear, erasing the parts of oneself that did not fit the prescribed role. Lord Matsudaira did become a more regular patron, his lecherous attentions now a familiar burden. Hana endured him, her mind often drifting to the dim, herb-scented hut by Benton Pond, to the grim, steady hands of Basan Fumi. That memory, paradoxically, became a strange source of strength. She had faced the worst, she told herself, and she was still here. But the experience had forged a new awareness within her. She began to observe the other women in the Okiya with a different eye. She saw the subtle signs she had once been blind to, the sudden, unexplained illnesses that confined a girl to her room for days, the hushed, tearful conferences in secluded corners, the desperate inquiries about certain teas. She recognized the same fear she had felt, mirrored in their eyes. One afternoon, Kiko, who was now blossoming into a sought-after Maiko, came to Hana, her usual cheerful demeanor clouded with anxiety. "Hana-ni-san," Kiko whispered, using the affectionate term for an elder sister, her eyes wide and frightened. Can I speak with you privately?" Hana led her to a quiet corner of the inner garden, a small, mossy space rarely used. "What is it, Kiko-chan?" Kiko burst into tears. I am with child," she stammered, the words barely audible. Her young face was ashen. One of the young merchants. He was kind. I was foolish. Hana's heart clenched. Kiko was barely 16, so young, so naive, so unprepared for the brutal reality of their world. The same terror Hana had felt now stared back at her from Kiko's tear-filled eyes. For a moment, Hana was paralyzed. The instinct for self-preservation, so deeply ingrained, screamed at her to feign ignorance, to offer vague sympathies and nothing more. To involve herself was to risk everything she had fought so desperately to protect. If Madame Yuki discovered... But then she saw her own reflection in Kiko's despair. She remembered the isolation, the consuming fear, the desperate search for help. She remembered Basan Fumi's hut. "Hush, Kiko-chan," Hana said softly, pulling the younger girl closer. "Do not cry so. We will find a way." The words came out before she could stop them, a commitment she hadn't consciously made. Kiko looked up, a fragile hope dawning in her eyes. You know something, Nissan?" Hana thought of the risks. If she helped Kiko, and they were discovered, the punishment would be severe for both of them. Madame Yuki would show no mercy, but to turn away, to leave Kiko to face this alone, she couldn't do it. The shared experience, the unspoken sisterhood of suffering, was too strong. "There are old remedies," Hana said carefully, "difficult ones, and there are people who can help outside the Okiya, but it is very dangerous, Kiko, and very secret." Over the next few days, Hana carefully guided Kiko. She first tried the less drastic herbal methods, brewing teas in secret, her heart pounding with every furtive trip to the kitchens, every hushed exchange. She watched Kiko suffer the same cramps, the same nausea that she herself had endured. But for Kiko, the herbs proved ineffective. The fear in Kiko's eyes grew with each passing day. Her youthful bloom was fading, replaced by a haunted look. Madame Yuki had already commented on her lack of sparkle. Time was running out. With a heavy heart, Hana knew what she had to do. She would take Kiko to Basan Fumi. The thought of returning to that hut filled Hana with a cold dread. But Kiko's desperate reliance on her, the trust in the younger girl's eyes, outweighed her own fear. Under the cloak of another moonless night, Hana led a disguised and trembling Kiko through the dark alleyways towards Benten Pond. The journey felt even more perilous this time, burdened as she was with the responsibility for another life, another desperate secret. Basan Fumi's hut was as grim and unsettling as Hana remembered. The old midwife's eyes, when they fell upon Kiko, held no surprise, only a weary resignation. "Another one," Fumi rasped. "The shadows are always hungry in Yoshiwara." Hana paid Fumi from Kiko's meager savings, adding some of her own. She stayed with Kiko through the ordeal, holding her hand, wiping her sweat-soaked brow, murmuring meaningless words of comfort as the younger girl writhed in agony, her muffled sobs tearing at Hana's heart. It was like reliving her own trauma, but this time she was not the patient, but the unwilling witness, the accomplice. When it was over, Kiko was pale and weak, but the immediate crisis had passed. Fumi, as before, was efficient and unsentimental. "She is young," Fumi said to Hana as Kiko drifted into an exhausted sleep. "She will recover, but you, girl, you take many risks." Her sharp eyes studied Hana. "Why?" Hana looked at Kiko's innocent sleeping face. "Because no one else would," she whispered. "Because I remember." Fumi grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. "Yoshiwara eats its young. It always has." They helped Kiko back to the Okiya before dawn, a silent, nerve-wracking journey. Kiko recovered slowly, the shadow of the experience lingering in her eyes, but she was safe. For now. Her gratitude towards Hana was profound, unspoken, a bond forged in shared terror and illicit aid. Life continued. But Hana was no longer just a survivor. She had become a conduit, a keeper of secrets, a reluctant guide through the darkest passages of their world. Occasionally, another girl, her face etched with the same familiar fear, would approach her, her voice a desperate whisper. And Hana, remembering her own ordeal, remembering Kiko, would help, always aware of the immense risks, always operating in the deepest shadows. She never sought it out, this role. It found her. Perhaps it was the lingering sorrow in her own eyes, a subtle understanding that the other desperate women recognized. She became a silent node in the underground network of survival that existed beneath Yoshiwara's glittering facade, a network built on whispered remedies, shared secrets, and the grim knowledge passed down not from healers, but from survivors. Madame Yuki, for all her astuteness, seemed to notice nothing. Or perhaps, Hana sometimes wondered, did she choose to look away? Did even the formidable Okasan understand, on some level, that these desperate measures were a necessary, if unspoken, part of keeping the Okiya running, of ensuring her investments remained profitable? It was a chilling thought. The system itself, perhaps, relied on these hidden cruelties to maintain its veneer of perfection. Hana never learned the answer. She only knew that she walked a razor's edge. Each act of secret assistance was a gamble, a defiance of the iron laws of Yoshiwara. She was no longer just Morning Glory, the beautiful Oiran. She was also a keeper of shadows, a sharer of dangerous knowledge. Years passed. Hana grew older, her beauty maturing, her reputation as a skilled and graceful geisha solidifying. She saw many girls come and go. Some flourished, some faded, some broke under the relentless pressure. Kiko eventually found a wealthy patron who, in a rare act of kindness, bought out her contract and married her, taking her away from Yoshiwara. It was a fairy tale ending, so rare as to be almost mythical, and Hana rejoiced silently for her. But Hana remained. She was too valuable to the Okiya, her debt too large, her spirit, perhaps, too enmeshed in the complex web of her existence. She was a fixture, an institution, a living work of art. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the Okiya was quiet and the ghosts of Yoshiwara seemed to walk the corridors, she would light a stick of incense before her hidden Jizo statue. Not just for the child she herself had lost, but for all the water children, the Mizuko, the unnamed, unmourned spirits of Yoshiwara, the ones who were never born or born and never raised. She would whisper a prayer, an apology, a lament, for them and for the women who had carried them, women who, like her, had to make impossible choices in a world that offered them so few. Her own body never again betrayed her with an unwanted pregnancy. Perhaps Basen Fumi's work had been too thorough, or perhaps Hana had learned a deeper, more profound caution. But the memory of that crisis, and the subsequent crises she helped others navigate, never faded. It became a part of her, like the scent of stale paper and metallic ink, like the faint, mournful twang of a distant shamisen, the sound of Yoshiwara, the sound of survival, the sound of a strength forged in silence and shame, a strength that no one outside those paper walls would ever truly understand. She was living art, yes, but she was also a warrior, painted in rouge and wrapped in silk, her battlefield the hidden heart of the floating world. One late autumn, as the maple leaves outside the Okiya's carefully tended garden began to turn crimson and gold, a new girl arrived. Her name was Sumiko, and she was no more than 14, sold from a village ravaged by famine. She had wide, terrified eyes and a fragility that reminded Hana achingly of Kiko, and even of herself, all those years ago. Sumiko struggled. The intricate dances, the subtle art of conversation, the endless rules of etiquette. It was all overwhelming. She was clumsy, frequently tearful, and drew Madame Yuki's ire more often than not. The other geishas, busy with their own careers and rivalries, offered little sympathy, seeing her as a liability, a potential drain on the Okiya's resources. Hana, however, found herself drawn to the girl's quiet desperation. She saw the raw fear that Sumiko tried so hard to hide. She began to offer small kindnesses, a word of encouragement, a gentle correction during dance practice, a shared sweet cake when no one was looking. It was not much, but in the harsh ecosystem of the Okiya, even a small gesture could feel like a lifeline. Madame Yuki, ever observant, noticed Hana's interest. "Do not waste your time on that one, Hana," she said one evening, her voice sharp. "She has no spirit for this life. She will not last. Some trees are not meant to bear fruit, only to wither." Hana bowed her head. "Perhaps, Oka-san, but even a wilting flower deserves a little water." Yuki merely snorted. But she did not forbid Hana further. Perhaps she saw some use in Hana's mentoring, a way to salvage a failing investment, however slim the chances. Despite Hana's efforts, Sumiko continued to flounder. And then, inevitably, the worst happened. Hana began to notice the telltale signs in the young girl, the morning pallor, the furtive trips to the latrine, the way Sumiko's hand would unconsciously drift to her stomach. One evening, Hana found Sumiko huddled in a dark corridor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Sumiko-chan," Hana said gently. "What is it?" "Nisan," Sumiko choked out, her face buried in her hands. "I am ruined, utterly ruined." The familiar, desperate words. Hana's heart sank, so young, so unprepared. This was not a sophisticated merchant or a powerful samurai. Sumiko had barely begun to entertain. The father, Hana suspected, was likely one of the Okiya's male servants, a quick, opportunistic encounter, a moment of foolishness or coercion that would now cost Sumiko everything. "Who was it, Sumiko?" Hana asked, her voice low. Sumiko shook her head, too terrified to speak his name. It didn't matter. The consequence was the same. Hana knew the paths available, the bitter teas, the dangerous journey to a Bazan. But Sumiko was so frail, so frightened. Hana doubted she had the physical or emotional fortitude to endure what she herself, or even Kiko, had gone through. "We must be very careful, Sumiko," Hana said, her mind already racing. "You must tell no one, no one." The next few weeks were a torment for both of them. Hana tried to shield Sumiko from Madame Yuki's harshest criticisms, subtly covering for her mistakes, guiding her through her duties. All the while, she watched Sumiko's belly with growing anxiety. This time, concealment was not an option that could last. Sumiko's small frame would betray her secret soon enough. Hana thought of Basan Fumi, but the memory of Kiko's ordeal, the sheer brutality of it, made her hesitate. Was there another way? A darker path, perhaps, but one that might spare Sumiko the immediate physical trauma? She remembered stories, even more hushed than those about the Basan. Stories of girls who simply ran. Nijigoro, runaway prostitutes. It was illegal, a betrayal of contract, and the brothels often hired men to hunt them down. If caught, the punishment was public, brutal, a warning to others. But if successful, it was a desperate, almost insane idea. Sumiko had no money, no connections outside Yoshiwara, nowhere to go, and with a baby on the way. Yet what was the alternative? A dangerous clandestine procedure that might kill her, or discovery and certain ruin, perhaps even death if Madame Yuki was in a particularly cruel mood, or if the pregnancy was too far advanced for easy solutions. Hana began to make discreet inquiries, tapping into the deepest, most hidden networks of Yoshiwara, the laundry women, the food vendors, the disreputable ronin who sometimes frequented the lowest-tier establishments. She learned of a man, a boatman, who sometimes, for a very high price, smuggled goods and occasionally people out of Edo under cover of darkness. He was said to be untrustworthy, greedy, but also desperate for coin. The price he named when Hana finally managed a clandestine meeting was astronomical. It would take everything Hana had saved over decades, every hidden trinket, every hoarded coin. It would leave her with nothing. She looked at Sumiko, at the girl's terrified, childlike face. She saw the future that awaited her in Yoshiwara if this secret came out. A short, brutal existence, or a slow, agonizing descent into the lowest rungs of the pleasure quarter. Hana made her decision. The planning was meticulous, terrifying. Hana gathered her secret hoard. She acquired a set of plain, sturdy peasant clothes for Sumiko. She arranged for a message to be sent to Sumiko's village. A vague, hopeful lie about Sumiko finding respectable work elsewhere. A small sum of money enclosed. A desperate attempt to give the girl some semblance of a future, however fabricated. The night of the escape was chosen carefully. A festival night when Yoshiwara would be at its most chaotic, its guards distracted, its gates less stringently watched. As the festival music and drunken shouts echoed through the district, Hana led a trembling Sumiko, disguised and carrying a small bundle, through the labyrinthine back alleys. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant laugh a potential discovery. Hana's own heart hammered against her ribs, louder than any festival drum. This was not just helping another, this was active rebellion, an act that could destroy her utterly if they were caught. They reached the agreed-upon meeting point, a deserted stretch of the Sumida River bank, far from the glittering lights of Yoshiwara. The boatman was there, a shadowy figure in a small, dilapidated skiff. His eyes gleamed with avarice as Hana handed over the heavy pouch of coins. "Get in," he grunted, his voice rough. Hana helped Sumiko into the boat. The girl was shaking so violently she could barely stand. "Nisan," Sumiko whispered, her eyes filled with tears and a dawning, terrified understanding of the sacrifice Hana was making. I cannot." "You must, Sumiko-chan," Hana said, her voice firm though her own heart was breaking. "You must live for yourself and for the little one." She pressed a small, carved Jizo charm into Sumiko's hand, the one she herself had kept for so many years. "May this protect you both." The boatman pushed off from the bank, the skiff gliding silently into the dark, flowing water. Hana stood on the riverbank, watching as the small boat disappeared into the mist and the darkness, carrying Sumiko and her unborn child away from Yoshiwara towards an unknown, uncertain future. She stood there for a long time, the cold river air chilling her to the bone. She had given away everything, her savings, her security, and in a way, a part of her own carefully constructed life within the Okiya. If Sumiko's absence was discovered too soon, if the boatman betrayed them, the consequences for Hana would be dire. But as she turned to walk back towards the glittering prison of Yoshiwara, a strange sense of lightness filled her. It was not happiness, not joy, but a profound, quiet sense of rightness. For once, she had not just reacted to the cruelty of her world, she had actively defied it. She had stolen a life, 2 lives, from its grasp. The cost would be high. She knew that. When she returned to the Okiya, the first questions about Sumiko's absence would begin. She would have to lie, to dissemble, to feign ignorance with all the skill she possessed. But tonight, under the indifferent gaze of the festival moon, Hana, the Oiran of Yoshiwara, the keeper of shadows, had done more than just survive. She had, in her own small, desperate way, fought back. And that, she realized, was a kind of art far more profound than any dance, any song she had ever performed. It was the art of impossible hope, in a world designed to crush it. The immediate aftermath of Sumiko's disappearance was fraught with tension. Madame Yuki, her face a thundercloud, interrogated every girl in the Okiya. Her questions were sharp, her gaze piercing, missing nothing. Sumiko's few belongings were searched, her acquaintances questioned. The air in the Okiya crackled with suspicion and fear. Hana maintained a facade of concerned ignorance. "Poor child," she would say, her voice tinged with just the right amount of pity. She was always so fragile. Perhaps the life here was too much for her spirit. Perhaps she simply wandered off, lost in her own sorrows. She knew it was a weak explanation. Girls did not simply wander off from Yoshiwara. They were property, their contracts binding, their debts enormous. But it was the only story she could offer. Days turned into weeks. No word came of Sumiko. The boatman, it seemed, had kept his part of the bargain, or perhaps he had simply vanished with his payment. Sumiko's fate an unknown tragedy. Hana could only pray that the girl and her child had found some measure of safety, however precarious. The initial furor in the Okiya eventually died down, replaced by the relentless demands of the business. Madame Yuki, though still watchful, seemed to accept, or at least resign herself to, Sumiko's loss as another failed investment. Other girls came, other dramas unfolded. Yoshiwara's appetite for new faces and fresh tragedies was insatiable. Hana, however, was changed by the experience. The act of defiance, of orchestrating Sumiko's escape, had ignited a spark within her, a quiet ember of resistance that the years of subservience had not entirely extinguished. She still performed her duties with impeccable grace, her smiles as radiant, her conversation as witty as ever. But beneath the surface, a new resolve had taken root. She became even more observant, more attuned to the hidden currents of Yoshiwara. She learned to read the subtle language of power, the unspoken rules that governed their lives even more tightly than the written contracts. She saw how fear was used as a tool of control, how debt was a chain that bound them more securely than any iron shackle. And she began, in very small, almost imperceptible ways, to push back. Not overtly, not foolishly. She knew the limits of her power, the swiftness of Yoshiwara's retribution. But she found ways. When a new girl arrived, terrified and clumsy like Sumiko had been, Hana would offer quiet guidance, not just in the arts of the geisha, but in the arts of survival. She taught them how to navigate Madame Yuki's moods, how to handle difficult clients, how to guard their meager savings, how to recognize the predatory intent in a seemingly kind gesture. She taught them the importance of solidarity, of watching out for one another, because no one else would. She also became a silent repository of forbidden knowledge. The whispers about certain herbs, the names of discreet basin on the district's fringes, the rumors of escape routes, however dangerous. This information, once hoarded out of fear, Hana now shared cautiously, judiciously, with those she deemed trustworthy, those whose desperation mirrored what she herself had once felt. She never asked for payment, never sought recognition. Her reward was the flicker of hope in a desperate girl's eyes, the knowledge that she might have eased a burden, prevented a tragedy, or offered a sliver of choice in a world that offered none. It was a dangerous game. A whisper in the wrong ear, a betrayal by a frightened or jealous girl, and her carefully constructed world could come crashing down. But the risk, she found, was a price she was willing to pay. The memory of Sumiko's terrified face and the profound relief of seeing that small boat disappear into the darkness had become a talisman, a reminder of what was possible, even in the heart of despair. Years continued to pass. Hana was no longer young. The title Morning Glory had long since faded, replaced by a more respectful, almost reverent, Hana-sama. She was an elder stateswoman of the Okiya, her wisdom sought by younger geishas, her opinion valued, though not always heeded by Madame Yuki, who had herself grown older, her sharpness softened by the weariness of years. The nature of Yoshiwara was changing too. The shogunate was weakening. Whispers of foreign ships and new ideas from the west were beginning to filter even into the cloistered world of the pleasure quarter. The old certainties were beginning to fray at the edges. One day a letter arrived at the Okiya. It was addressed simply to Hana-sama, with no sender's name, postmarked from a remote fishing village in the northern province of Mutsu. The paper was coarse, the handwriting unrefined but legible. Hana opened it with trembling fingers. "Esteemed Hana-sama, forgive this unworthy intrusion. Many years have passed, but the memory of your kindness remains as bright as the morning star. I live a simple life now by the sea. My son Kenji is strong and healthy. He asks often about the kind lady who gave his mother the small Jizo charm, the one that kept us safe on our long journey. He does not know the world from which we came, and for that I am eternally grateful. I pray for your health and happiness, though I know happiness is a rare bloom in the garden you tend. Know that your sacrifice was not in vain. A life, 2 lives you saved continue to draw breath because of your courage. With deepest gratitude, S." Tears streamed down Hana's face as she read the letter, blurring the ink. Sumiko, she was alive. Her son was alive. They were safe. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees washed over Hana. It was not just relief, not just joy, but a profound sense of validation. All the risks, all the fear, all the years of quiet defiance, they had meant something. They had mattered. She carefully folded the letter, tucking it away in the same hidden drawer where she kept her Jizo statue. It was the most precious treasure she possessed. That evening, as she prepared for her duties, an engagement with a visiting dignitary from a distant domain, Hana looked at her reflection in the mirror. The face that stared back was no longer that of a young, frightened girl. It was the face of a woman who had seen too much, endured too much, but who had also found a strength she never knew she possessed. Her eyes, though lined now at the corners, held a depth, a wisdom, a quiet fire that no amount of Oshiroi powder could create or conceal. The world outside Yoshiwara was changing, and perhaps one day Yoshiwara itself would change, or even cease to exist. Hana did not know what the future held, but she knew this. She had lived her life within its walls, not just as a beautiful illusion, not just as a victim, but as a woman who had fought in her own way for dignity, for compassion, for the lives of others. As she walked out to greet her client, the scent of stale paper and metallic ink, the eternal perfume of Yoshiwara, no longer felt like a suffocating reminder of her cage. It felt instead like the scent of a battlefield upon which small, silent victories had been won. And Hana, the aging Oiran, the keeper of shadows and secrets, carried those victories within her, a quiet, unyielding strength, as radiant and enduring as any morning glory welcoming the dawn. The art of her life had not been in the performance, but in the profound, often perilous humanity she had managed to preserve and share in a world designed to strip it away. And that, she knew, was a legacy more lasting than any silk kimono, any whispered poem. The letter from Sumiko became Hana's secret touchstone. In moments of weariness, when the endless charade of Yoshiwara threatened to overwhelm her, she would take it out, reread the simple, heartfelt words, and feel a renewal of purpose. Kenji, Sumiko's son. A life that would never know the gilded cage, the crushing debt, the fear that had been Sumiko's constant companion. That was a victory more profound than any patron's favor or any display of artistic skill. As the years advanced, Hana's role within the Okiya subtly shifted. While still a highly sought-after geisha for discerning clients, her age and experience naturally led her to a more mentoring position. Younger girls, awed by her reputation and sensing an underlying kindness beneath her formal demeanor, would seek her counsel. Madame Yuki, now frail and often confined to her chambers, increasingly relied on Hana's judgment in managing the day-to-day affairs of the house. It was an ironic twist. The woman who had once been a mere investment now held considerable, albeit informal, power within the very institution that had owned her. Hana used this influence cautiously, always mindful of the delicate balance of power in Yoshiwara. She couldn't dismantle the system. That was an impossible dream. But she could, perhaps, mitigate its harshest cruelties from within. She advocated for better treatment of the younger Maiko, for fairer accounting of their debts, a constant source of manipulation and despair, and for more humane responses to the inevitable indiscretions that occurred. She never spoke openly of abortions or escapes. That knowledge remained in the deepest shadows, shared only in whispers with those in the most desperate need. But her reputation as someone who understood, who might offer a path where none seemed to exist, spread quietly among the women of Yoshiwara, a fragile beacon in the darkness. The world outside continued its inexorable march. The black ships of the Westerners had forced Japan's doors open. The shogunate crumbled. A new emperor, Meiji, ascended the throne, promising modernization, a new era. The winds of change were beginning to blow even through the perfumed, cloistered alleys of Yoshiwara. Some of the older geishas spoke of these changes with fear, clinging to the familiar traditions. Others whispered of new opportunities, of a world beyond the paper screens. Hana listened to it all, her expression serene, her thoughts her own. She had seen too much of Yoshiwara's unyielding nature to believe in easy transformations. But a part of her, the part that had orchestrated Sumiko's escape, held on to a sliver of hope. One day, a young woman was brought to the Okiya. Her name was Chiyo. She was not a child sold by a starving family, but a runaway from a respectable merchant household in Kyoto, fleeing an arranged marriage to an old, cruel man. She had sought refuge in Yoshiwara, a desperate, ill-conceived plan, believing it offered a strange kind of freedom, an escape from one cage into what she naively imagined was another, more exciting one. She was beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely independent, qualities that, in Yoshiwara, could be both an asset and a terrible liability. Madame Yuki, her business acumen still sharp despite her age, saw Chiyo's potential, but also recognized the danger in her rebellious spirit. Chiyo quickly clashed with the rigid discipline of the Okiya. She questioned the rules, bridled at the subservience, and made no secret of her disdain for many of the clients. She was on a collision course with disaster. Hana saw in Chiyo a different kind of desperation than she had seen in Sumiko or Kiko. It was not the fear of a trapped animal, but the frustration of a caged bird beating its wings against the bars. One evening, after Chiyo had had a particularly explosive argument with Madame Yuki, resulting in a harsh punishment, Hana sought her out. She found Chiyo in her small room, not crying, but staring out at the sliver of moon visible between the rooftops, her eyes blazing with a cold fury. "Yoshiwara is not the escape you imagined, is it, Chiyo-san?" Hana said quietly. Chiyo whirled around. "This place is a prison, just like the one I fled," she spat. "A more beautiful prison, perhaps, but a prison nonetheless. You all act like willing dolls dancing for these pathetic men." Hana did not flinch from the girl's anger. "We do what we must to survive, Chiyo-san. Some of us have known no other life. Some of us had no choice in coming here. But there must be more than this," Chiyo insisted, her voice raw. "This new era they speak of, surely it means something, even for women like us?" Hana looked at the passionate, defiant young woman. Chiyo's spirit was a dangerous flame in the Okiya, but it was also, perhaps, a spark of the future. "The world is changing, it is true," Hana said slowly. "But places like Yoshiwara, they change very slowly, if at all, and they do not easily release those they hold." She paused, then made a decision. "But perhaps for someone like you, with your fire, there might be other paths, if you are willing to take even greater risks than coming here." Over the following weeks, Hana spoke with Chiyo, not as a geisha mentoring an apprentice, but as one woman to another. She did not offer easy solutions or false hopes. Instead, she shared some of the hard-earned wisdom of her years, the realities of Yoshiwara, the true cost of defiance. And then she told Chiyo about the world outside, the world that was slowly, painfully, beginning to open up. She spoke of the new schools for women, though they were few and far between. She spoke of the foreign trading houses in Yokohama, where a woman with intelligence and perhaps a knowledge of languages might find a different kind of work, however unconventional. These were not paths Hana herself could ever have taken, but for Chiyo, young, educated, she could read and write fluently, a rarity, and fiercely determined, they were not entirely impossible. It was a gamble, even more audacious than Sumiko's escape. To help Chiyo leave Yoshiwara not as a pregnant fugitive, but as a woman seeking a different destiny would require a different kind of planning, different kinds of contacts. Hana used the respect and influence she had carefully cultivated over the years. She called upon old patrons, men who owed her favors, men who had connections in the burgeoning world of Meiji-era commerce. She spent her remaining personal funds, not on a boatman this time, but on securing a discreet passage for Chiyo to Yokohama and a letter of introduction, however tenuous, to a foreign merchant's wife known for her charitable work and her somewhat unconventional views on women's roles. The night Chiyo left, there was no festival to cover their movements, only the deep silence of a sleeping city. Hana dressed Chiyo not as a peasant, but as a modest young woman of good family, her rebellious fire carefully banked beneath an exterior of quiet respectability. "Are you certain about this, Nisan?" Chiyo asked, her bravado tinged with a very real fear as they stood near a side gate of Yoshiwara, a gate Hana had arranged to be unlatched. "The risks for you." "My risks are my own concern," Hana said. "You have a chance, Chiyo-san. A small one, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. Do not waste it. Learn, grow, and do not look back." Chiyo impulsively embraced Hana, a gesture of raw emotion that was utterly out of place in the restrained world of the Okiya. "I will never forget you, Hana-sama." "Go," Hana urged, pushing her gently towards the gate. "The world awaits." She watched Chiyo slip out into the darkness, a solitary figure walking towards an unknown future. This time there was no letter to confirm success, no tangible proof of a life saved. Only a fragile hope, and the quiet satisfaction of having opened a door, however small, for another woman to escape the gilded cage. Hana returned to her room in the Okiya. She was old now. Her dancing days were mostly behind her. She spent her time teaching the younger girls, managing the household, a respected, almost revered figure. She had never known love in the way the romantic songs described. She had never known the joy of her own children. Her life had been one of service, of sacrifice, of carefully navigated survival. But as she sat by her window, looking out at the unchanging rooftops of Yoshiwara, she did not feel regret. She thought of Sumiko, living a simple life by the sea with her son. She thought of Chiyo, facing the challenges and opportunities of a new Japan, armed with her fierce spirit and the chance Hana had given her. These were her legacies, not the fleeting admiration of patrons, nor the ephemeral beauty of a dance, but the lives she had touched, the small acts of rebellion against a cruel system, the quiet affirmations of human dignity in a place designed to deny it. The scent of stale paper and metallic ink still filled the air. The distant twang of a shamisen still drifted on the night breeze. Yoshiwara remained. But within its walls, because of women like Hana and the secret, desperate networks they forged, flickers of hope, acts of courage, and the enduring strength of the human spirit continued to exist. Like hidden Jizo statues in the darkest corners, watching over those who suffered and those who dared to dream of a world beyond the paper screens. But within its walls, because of women like Hana and the secret, desperate networks they forged, flickers of hope, acts of courage, and the enduring strength of the human spirit continued to exist, like hidden Jizo statues in the darkest corners, watching over those who Hana closed her eyes. She had done what she could, and perhaps in the grand, sorrowful tapestry of Yoshiwara, that was enough. The Meiji Restoration continued to reshape Japan, its effects rippling even into the secluded world of Yoshiwara. New laws were enacted, old customs questioned. There was talk of civilization and enlightenment, and while the pleasure quarters were far from the vanguard of such movements, the ground beneath them was subtly shifting. Some Okiya, unable or unwilling to adapt, closed their doors. Others, like the one Hana belonged to, tried to navigate the changing tides, clinging to tradition while cautiously acknowledging the new realities. Madame Yuki eventually passed away, a quiet fading rather than a dramatic exit. In her final days she had summoned Hana. Her once sharp eyes were clouded, her voice a mere whisper. "Hana," she had rasped, clutching Hana's hand with surprising strength. "You were a good daughter to this house. Better than I deserved, perhaps." A flicker of something unreadable, regret, understanding, passed through her eyes. The world is changing. Protect the Okiya. Protect the girls. It was the closest thing to an apology, or perhaps a blessing, that Madame Yuki was capable of. After her death, The Okia's ownership passed to a distant relative, a businessman with little understanding of Yoshiwara's intricate world. He was content to leave the day-to-day management largely in Hana's hands, recognizing her experience and the respect she commanded. And so Hana, who had entered Yoshiwara as a child sold into debt, found herself in her later years the de facto head of the Okiya. It was a position she had never sought, a responsibility she carried with a heavy heart, but also with a quiet determination. She could not undo the fundamental nature of Yoshiwara. It was still a place where women's bodies were commodities, where illusion was currency. But she could, and did, strive to make her Okiya a place of slightly less cruelty, slightly more compassion. She insisted on fairer contracts for the new girls, ensuring their debts were transparent and not artificially inflated to ensure perpetual servitude. A small change, but a significant one. She abolished some of the harsher, more humiliating punishments for minor infractions. She ensured the girls received proper medical care for common ailments, a stark contrast to the neglect that had often prevailed. And the issue of unwanted pregnancies, the secret terror that had defined so much of her own life. Hana could not make it disappear. The pressures remained, the consequences of discovery still dire. But within her own Okiya, a subtle shift occurred. Girls who found themselves in that desperate situation no longer had to rely solely on hushed, fearful whispers or the terrifying gamble of unknown remedies. They came to Hana. Not openly, not in a way that would ever be acknowledged, but they came. Hana would listen, her face serene, her eyes filled with an understanding that needed no words. She would not offer judgment, only a quiet, practical assessment of their options. Sometimes, if the girl was strong and the circumstances allowed, she would discreetly facilitate a visit to a trusted Basan. Fumi had long since passed, but others had taken her place, the grim necessity of their services enduring. Hana ensured the girl had the funds, that she was cared for afterward, that her absence was plausibly explained. Sometimes, if the pregnancy was too far advanced, or if the girl was too frail for such an ordeal, Hana would find other ways. She used her network of contacts, built over decades, patrons, merchants, even officials who owed her past favors or respected her discretion. She arranged for quiet adoptions, for girls to be sent away to recover from an illness. At a distant temple or a rural relative's home, returning months later, their secret preserved, their child placed, however precariously, into another life. These were not easy solutions. They were fraught with risk, with heartache, with moral complexities, but they were choices, however limited, offered with a degree of compassion that had been unthinkable in her own youth. Hana was not naive. She knew she was still operating within a brutal system. But she was doing what she could to mitigate its damage, to offer a sliver of humanity within its unyielding walls. She often thought of Sumiko and of Chiyo. She never received another letter from Sumiko, but the memory of the first one was enough. Occasionally she would hear vague rumors from Yokohama, whispers of a Japanese woman, unusually independent and well-spoken, working with foreigners, advocating for education for girls. Hana allowed herself to believe it might be Chiyo, carving out a new destiny in a changing world. Her own life was drawing to a close. The aches in her bones were more persistent now, her steps slower. The vibrant silks and elaborate hairstyles had long been replaced by the simpler, more somber attire of an elder woman. But her eyes, when she looked at the young Maiko in her charge, still held that quiet fire, that deep, compassionate wisdom. One evening, as a soft spring rain fell on Yoshiwara, pattering against the paper screens, Hana sat in her small room, the one that had witnessed so much of her life's joys and sorrows. She was looking at the small, worn Jizo charm that Sumiko had returned to her through a trusted intermediary years ago, a silent thank you. A young Maiko, barely 15, named Fuyumi, entered hesitantly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a familiar terror. "Hana-sama," Fuyumi whispered, her voice trembling. May I speak with you?" Hana looked at the girl, and in her frightened face she saw herself, she saw Kiko, she saw Sumiko. The cycle, it seemed, was endless. She gestured to the cushion opposite her. "Sit, Fuyumi-chan," she said, her voice gentle, weary but kind. "Tell me. Whatever it is, we will face it together." As Fuyumi began her tearful, halting story, Hana listened, her heart aching with a familiar sorrow, but also with a quiet resolve. The world was changing, yes, but some struggles, it seemed, remained timeless. And her work, the quiet, often invisible work of compassion and survival in the heart of Yoshiwara, was not yet done. She would do what she could, for as long as she could. It was the only art she truly knew, the only legacy she truly cared to leave. The rain continued to fall, washing the dust from the rooftops of the floating world, a gentle, persistent sound like the endless, quiet tears of the women who lived and suffered and endured within its walls. Fuyumi's story was a painfully familiar one, a moment of youthful indiscretion, a fleeting connection with a client who had seemed kinder, more attentive than most. Now, weeks later, the undeniable signs had appeared, bringing with them the crushing weight of fear and the spectre of ruin. Hana listened without interruption, her gaze steady and compassionate. When Fuyumi finished, her words dissolving into quiet sobs, Hana reached out and gently took the girl's trembling hand. "Hush now, child," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Tears will not change what is, but courage and careful thought might offer us a path." Over the next few days, Hana considered Fuyumi's situation. The girl was young, but not as fragile as Sumiko had been. She had a certain resilience beneath her fear. A visit to a basan was a possibility, though the risks were always profound. But then something unexpected happened. The client Fuyumi had named, a mid-ranking samurai named Kenzo, returned to the Okiya. This was unusual. Often men involved in such complications, if they suspected anything, would simply disappear. Kenzo, however, specifically requested Fuyumi. Hana, her instincts honed by decades in Yoshiwara, watched him closely when he arrived. He was younger than many of their patrons, with a serious, almost somber demeanor. He did not have the predatory air of some, nor the boorishness of others. When Fuyumi went to entertain him, Hana arranged to be nearby, her excuse an anachronistic concern for the Okiya's accounts. She overheard snippets of their conversation. Kenzo was quiet, respectful. He spoke to Fuyumi not as a plaything, but as a person. And Hana saw, with a jolt of surprise, that Fuyumi, despite her fear, seemed to respond to him with a degree of genuine warmth. Later that night, Fuyumi sought out Hana, her expression a mixture of confusion and a dawning, terrified hope. "Hana-sama," she whispered. "Kenzo-sama, he asked me if I was unwell. He said I seemed burdened. He was kind." Hana's mind raced. This was a new variable, an unknown quantity. Could this man be different, or was this merely a more subtle form of manipulation? "Be cautious, Fuyumi," Hana warned. "Kindness in Yoshiwara can be a mask for many things." But Kenzo returned again, and then again. Each time, he treated Fuyumi with a gentle courtesy that was rare in their world. And Fuyumi slowly began to confide in him, hinting at her distress. One evening, Kenzo requested a private audience with Hana. This was highly unusual. Patrons dealt with the Okasan, or in this Okiya's case now, with Hana in her managerial role, regarding financial matters or specific requests for entertainment. A private, personal discussion was almost unheard of. They met in Hana's small, quiet room. Kenzo sat formally, his expression grave. "Hana-sama," he began, his voice low and steady. "I have come to speak about Fuyumi-san. I know that she is with child, and I know that the child is mine." Hana met his gaze, her own unblinking. "And what do you propose to do about this, Kenzo-sama?" she asked, her voice neutral. Kenzo looked down at his hands. "I am not a wealthy man, Hana-sama. I cannot buy out her contract, not in the way a great daimyo might. My samurai stipend is modest. But I cannot abandon her. I cannot abandon my child." He looked up, his eyes filled with a sincere, troubled honesty. "I wish to take responsibility, if there is any way." Hana was stunned into silence. In all her years in Yoshiwara, she had never encountered such a sentiment from a client. Abandonment, denial, disappearing acts, those were the norms. This was unprecedented. "The laws of Yoshiwara are not kind to such situations, Kenzo-sama," Hana said carefully. "A child born to a geisha has no place here, and Fuyumi's career would be over. The Okiya would face complications." "I understand that," Kenzo said. "I have thought of little else. I have a widowed aunt who lives in a small village far from Edo. She is old, childless. She might be willing to raise the child as her own, and Fuyumi, if she could perhaps be ill for a time, sent away to recover her health." He looked at Hana, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Is such a thing ever possible?" Hana thought of Sumiko. She thought of the risks she herself had taken. This was different. This involved the father, a man willing to participate, to offer a solution, however imperfect. "Such things are extraordinarily difficult, Kenzo-sama," Hana said, "and very costly, not just in coin but in risk for everyone involved." "I will sell what I have," Kenzo said. "My armor, my family's swords, if necessary. I will find the coin, and I will pledge my silence, my discretion, my life if need be, to protect Fuyumi and this house from any scandal." Hana studied him for a long, silent moment. She saw not a feckless client, but a man grappling with his conscience, a man trying, in his own way, to do the honorable thing in a dishonorable world. It would require careful planning, Hana said slowly, and absolute secrecy. Fuyumi would indeed have to become very ill. She would need to disappear from Yoshiwara for many months, and her return would have to be managed with utmost discretion. A flicker of hope ignited in Kenzo's eyes. You would consider helping us?" Hana thought of all the girls she had helped, of the shadows she had navigated. This was, perhaps, the most audacious plan of all, but it also felt different. It felt like a chance, not just to avert a tragedy, but to build something, however fragile. "I will consider it, Kenzo-sama," she said, "for Fuyumi's sake, and for the sake of the child who deserves a life beyond these walls." The plan they concocted was intricate, perilous. Kenzo, true to his word, sold a prized family heirloom, a set of antique calligraphy scrolls, to raise the necessary funds. Not for the Okia's coffers, Hana decided, but for Fuyumi's journey, for her care during her confinement, and for the support of Kenzo's aunt. Fuyumi was declared to be suffering from a lingering lung ailment that required the clean air of the countryside. Hana arranged for her to travel, discreetly, to Kenzo's aunt's village, accompanied by a trusted older woman, a former servant of the Okiya, whom Hana had helped in the past and who owed her a debt of loyalty. The months that followed were filled with anxiety for Hana. Messages were few and far between, carried by trusted, infrequent travellers. Kenzo visited the Okiya occasionally, maintaining a facade of a regular patron. His interactions with Hana always brief, formal, their shared secret an unspoken bond between them. Then, one spring morning, a small, discreetly wrapped package arrived for Hana. Inside, nestled among soft cotton, was a tiny, exquisitely sewn baby's kimono, the fabric a simple blue, the kind a village child might wear. There was no note. None was needed. Fuyumi's child, a boy, had been born safely. A few months later, Fuyumi returned to Yoshiwara. She was thinner, her youthful exuberance tempered by a new maturity, a quiet sadness in her eyes, but also a deep, resilient strength. She resumed her duties, her illness forgotten, her skills as a geisha surprisingly enhanced by her experiences. She never spoke of her time away, nor of the child she had left in the care of another. But sometimes Hana would see her looking towards the north, a wistful, faraway expression on her face. Kenzo continued to visit Fuyumi, their relationship now a subtle, unspoken understanding. He would never claim his son publicly, nor could Fuyumi ever be his wife in the eyes of the world. Their connection was a secret, a fragile thing nurtured in the shadows of Yoshiwara. But it was real. Hana watched them, and she felt a sense of peace that was rare and profound. She had not changed Yoshiwara. But she had, in this one instance, helped to weave a different kind of story within its ancient, unyielding framework, a story not just of survival, but of responsibility, of love, of a future, however compromised, for a child who might otherwise never have had one. As she grew older, her own flame beginning to dim, Hana knew that these were the moments that truly defined her life. Not the applause of patrons, nor the beauty of her art, but the quiet acts of courage and compassion, the lives she had touched, the small, secret rebellions against a world that sought to deny such things. The floating world would continue to float, its illusions as captivating, its realities as harsh as ever. But within it, because of women like her, and perhaps even men like Kenzo, the human spirit, in all its flawed, resilient beauty, would continue to find ways to endure, to connect, and even, sometimes, to love. And that, Hana knew, was a legacy worth more than all the gold in Edo. The final years of Hana's life were spent in relative tranquility, a strange calm after decades of navigating treacherous currents. She had become a living legend within Yoshiwara, the grandmother of the Okiya, as some of the younger girls affectionately called her, though never to her face. Her authority was unquestioned, her wisdom sought. She moved through the Okiya like a serene, silver-haired ghost, her presence a reminder of endurance, of history, of the countless untold stories that lay beneath Yoshiwara's glittering surface. She no longer entertained patrons, her body too frail for the rigors of all-night banquets and demanding performances. Instead, she oversaw the training of new Maiko, her critiques gentle but precise, her encouragement a precious commodity. She managed the Okiya's finances with an astuteness that would have impressed Madame Yuki, ensuring its stability in an era of rapid societal change. The Meiji government was enacting reforms that directly impacted the pleasure quarters. Attempts at regulation, shifts in social mores. Yoshiwara was not the untouchable, lawless entity it had once been. It was adapting, reluctantly, to a new Japan. Hana watched these changes with a detached interest. She had lived through too many cycles of hope and despair to place much faith in grand pronouncements of progress. The fundamental nature of the place, she knew, the buying and selling of illusion and flesh, would likely endure in some form, as it always had. But perhaps, she mused, the suffering could be lessened. Perhaps the cages, even if they remained, could be made a little less cruel. Fuyumi had risen to become a respected geisha in her own right, her past sorrow lending a poignant depth to her art. Kenzo remained a discreet, infrequent visitor, their connection a quiet, enduring thread in the tapestry of their lives. Hana knew that Fuyumi received occasional, carefully worded letters from Kenzo's aunt, speaking of a healthy, growing boy in a distant village. It was a fragile link, but a precious one. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Hana sat by her window, watching the last crimson leaves fall from the maple tree in the Okiya's small garden, a message arrived. It was from Fuyumi. Kenzo was gravely ill, a fever that the doctors could not break. He was asking for Hana. This was highly irregular. A geisha did not visit a patron in his home, especially not one of Hana's age and stature, and certainly not when he was ill. It would be a breach of protocol, a potential source of gossip. But the urgency in Fuyumi's plea, conveyed through a trusted messenger, was undeniable. Hana made her decision swiftly. She donned a simple dark kimono, her face unadorned with powder, her silver hair neatly pinned. She looked not like the grand dame of an Okiya, but like any elderly woman going to pay her respects. Kenzo lived in a modest samurai dwelling, far from the opulence of Yoshiwara. Fuyumi met Hana at the gate, her face pale and strained, her eyes red from weeping. "Hana-sama," she whispered, bowing deeply. "Thank you for coming. He has been asking for you." Hana entered the small, sparsely furnished room. Kenzo lay on a futon, his breathing shallow, his face gaunt and flushed with fever. He was much changed from the earnest, troubled man she had first met. He looked old, defeated. He opened his eyes as Hana approached, a flicker of recognition, of gratitude in their depths. "Hana-sama," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You came." "Kenzo-sama," Hana said softly, kneeling beside him. "Fuyumi told me you were unwell." He tried to smile, a faint, painful grimace. The journey ends, it seems." He coughed, a racking sound. "There is something I must ask of you, a final burden. Speak, Kenzo-sama, if you have the strength." His gaze drifted towards Fuyumi, who stood silently in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly. "Fuyumi, she cannot acknowledge him, our son, but he should know something, of his father, of a mother who loved him, even if she could not keep him." His breath hitched. "When I am gone, will you ensure Fuyumi has the means to send a message to my aunt, a token, so the boy will not think himself entirely abandoned by this world?" Tears welled in Hana's eyes. Even now, at the end, his thoughts were of the child, of Fuyumi, of trying to mend, however imperfectly, the broken threads of their lives. "I will ensure it, Kenzo-sama," Hana said, her voice thick with emotion. "I give you my word. The boy will know he was not forgotten." A profound relief seemed to settle over Kenzo's features. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Hana. "You, Hana-sama," he whispered. "You have seen so much. You have a strength I never understood. Thank you for showing me that even in Yoshiwara, honor and kindness can exist." He closed his eyes again, and his breathing grew fainter. Fuyumi rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face, taking his hand. Hana remained kneeling, a silent witness to this quiet, heartbreaking farewell. Kenzo passed away before dawn. Hana helped Fuyumi with the necessary arrangements, her presence a calm, steadying force. They kept it simple, discreet, as befitted his modest station and their complicated connection. A few days later, Hana gave Fuyumi a small, beautifully crafted writing box and a pouch of coins. "For your son, Fuyumi-chan," she said. "Write to him. Tell him of his father's courage, of his love. Let him know he was cherished." Fuyumi wept, clutching the box to her chest. "Oh, Hana-sama, I can never repay you." "There is nothing to repay, child," Hana said, gently stroking Fuyumi's hair. "We do what we can for those we care for. That is all." Hana lived for a few more years, her life a quiet denouement. The world continued to change around her, Yoshiwara with it, slowly, inexorably. She saw the first electric lights flicker in the district, heard the distant rumble of the first trains. The age of the samurai was well and truly over. A new Japan was being born. She often sat by her window, the letter from Sumiko and the memory of Kenzo's last words her constant companions. She had not sought power, or wealth, or even love in the conventional sense. Her life had been one of shadows, of secrets, of navigating a world designed to crush the spirit. Yet in her own quiet way, she had found a profound meaning. She had been a keeper of stories, a mender of broken lives, a small flickering light in the darkness. One spring morning, as the cherry blossoms outside her window unfurled their delicate pink petals, Hana did not wake. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, an old woman in a changing world, her long, extraordinary life within the walls of Yoshiwara finally at an end. The girls of the Okiya mourned her genuinely, not just as their manager, but as a true Okasan, a mother figure who had offered them guidance, protection, and a rare, unwavering compassion. Fuyumi, now a senior geisha herself, oversaw her funeral rites with quiet dignity. There were no grand monuments to Hana's life, no poems written in her honor by famous scholars. Her name would not be recorded in the official histories of the Meiji era. She was, after all, just a geisha, a woman from the floating world, a world whose stories were often written in invisible ink, meant to be forgotten. But her legacy lived on. In the quiet strength of Fuyumi, in the free life of Sumiko and her son Kenji by the distant sea, in the unknown future of Chiyo forging her own path in a new Japan, and in the hearts of the countless unnamed women she had helped, whose burdens she had lightened, whose desperate secrets she had kept. Her true art had not been the dance, nor the song, nor the artful pouring of sake. It had been the art of humanity, practiced in the most inhumane of places. And that art, though unrecorded and unsung, was the most beautiful and enduring of all. The floating world might forget her name, but the ripples of her compassion, her courage, her quiet defiance would continue to spread, unseen, for generations to come.